welcome back to Indie Cult Horror. I guess I'm going to start by saying I'm sorry. I did not mean to be away for so many months. I really appreciate that you guys have been watching, and I wish I had kept up my end of the deal better. Not much I can say. But what I can say is I'm back, and I am happy to bring you new episodes for 2019. I want to start 2019 with a really special, important interview for me. One that's probably my favorite of the batch of interviews that I did for my master's. And that's my interview with Gunnar Hansen. I hope you all know who Gunnar is, but of course, if you don't, if the name doesn't ring a bell, he is of course the actor who played Leatherface in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was a period in like the late 90s, early 2000s where Gunnar had kind of stopped doing interviews. It was more the, I kind of feel like I've answered all the questions there are. I think I've told you guys everything there is to know about Texas Chainsaw. And, you know, I want to move on. That was one summer of my life that I worked on that film. I've done other things. You know, he wrote some books. He was in other movies besides Texas Chainsaw as well. And, you know, I think he kind of put a kibosh on interviews for quite a bit there. So, I had done a little research and found out there were a few ways to get in touch with him. So I did reach out. I mean, he was still doing conventions, and I heard that he was going to be at the Chiller Theater that was coming up. And I had asked, you know, would it be possible? I'm working on my master's. It's a documentary about cult and horror films, and I would love to get the chance to sit down and talk to you about, you know, the iconic role that you played. And I was really beside myself that he not only responded, but said, I'll do it. He was happy to hear that it was for part of my educational endeavors, and he was very gracious. So gracious that when we met him in person, he had us come to his room. It was before the show opened on a Sunday, and we sat down for almost an hour, I think. And I was just amazed. He was the kindest, nicest person. He was funny. He was very happy to talk about things. And, I mean, he told some of those kind of classic stories that you know from the making of Texas Chainsaw, but it was amazing for me to hear those stories in person and be able to share them from, you know, my own film, my own footage. And it was just an amazing experience, and he was the greatest of people that I met. And one of the greatest outcomes of the making my master's documentary was that I kind of formed a friendship with Gunnar. There's a couple people that I met throughout the years in working on that documentary that I would have been amazed to say that they knew who I was, and when I would see them, they would remember me and talk to me. And Gunnar was definitely one of those people. He's one of the first people who, whenever I would see him, if he was at a convention in New Jersey or, you know, in one of the other East Coast cons that we went to, and he saw us online, Gunnar would come out from behind his table and give me a big hug and ask how we were doing and what we were up to. And it's just, that really was, you know, I don't even know what to compare that to. That was just an amazing feeling that somebody who made a film that had a huge impact, not just on me, but on horror history, right, would take his time and come talk to me and remember me for it, which was really cool. And I really miss him when we go to conventions. He had a big laugh, and he was a really sweet guy. And he's one of the reasons why I really kind of revisited these tapes, because Gunnar's passing, H.G. Lewis's passing, when both of those happened, I realized I had footage that no one had seen of them. And I wanted to be able to share that with other fans, because, you know, when you're a fan of someone's work, you know, anything you can find that you haven't seen before is always, you know, a gem. And so I hope that you guys enjoy this interview that I did with Gunnar Hansen, and maybe there's a couple little moments in there that you might not have known about or heard about before. And, I hope that, all you Texas Chainsaw fans out there and all you horror and cult film fanatics will enjoy this interview with Gunnar Hansen.
My name is Gunnar Hansen. I was Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Why did you shy away from film for so long? There's a large gap in your filmography.
The reason really is that when I did Chainsaw Massacre, I wasn't thinking of it as a career thing. I never was interested in working as an actor. My interest always was writing. So when I did Chainsaw, I did it for the sake of having an interesting job for the summer. And after Chainsaw, I had the opportunity to work on a couple of pictures, including The Hills of Eyes, which has become such a famous film. Bob Burns, who was the art director on Chainsaw, was also the art director on The Hills of Eyes. He called me from LA and said, "We've got this movie, it's a new director, we need you here in 2 weeks." And I just said, "Well, Bob, I'm not doing pictures." And I turned down a couple other things. And I guess what I was thinking about was, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to build a career or to have some success writing. But I wasn't willing to do that for acting because it meant nothing. I mean, I hate to say it that way. I mean, I don't mean to denigrate it, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And so my feeling was that I don't want to move to Los Angeles. I don't want to go through those things that a person has to go through for the sake of working as an actor. I would go through those things for the sake of writing. My mistake in all of this was I wasn't being asked to go out and suffer for the sake of getting film work. I was just simply being asked to show up and do the job. And finally, back in 1987, 13 years after Chainsaw came out, I got a call from a guy that I had known for years, and he said, it was Fred Ray. He said, "I'm in LA directing pictures. Do you want to come out and make this movie?" And I thought about this. I thought, why am I not doing these jobs, doing these films? So I did go out and made this movie, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. And although I did tell him I wasn't going to sign a contract till I read the script, with a title like that. So, and then after that, people just started calling me because they found out I was willing to work in films. And so, even though writing is still what I consider my work, I do films now because the opportunities come. And I enjoy working as an actor. It isn't that at all. So I think now I've done 10 or 11 films since, starting with Hookers. So I average, a film a year or so. Some years I'll do 2, and then I may go a couple of years before I do another one.
Since we've kind of gotten to the topic of it, I was going to ask about Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers and how that kind of came about and what your initial reaction was to that project.
Well, Fred called me, and at first I thought, well, why would I want to do this? And he just said, "Look, I'm making these pictures. We're going to do this film. Do you want to come and do it?" And my problem actually with it was twofold. I mean, my first problem was, do I want to get up in front of the camera? Do I want to, I'm going to feel awful foolish. I haven't done this in a long time. But then I thought, well, that's silly. I just need to just commit to that. But my other problem was the title. And so I said to him, I said, "Look, just send me a copy of the script. I'm interested, but just let me see the script." And he said, "Well, we're in rewrite right now," which meant there was no script. And there probably wasn't going to be a script if I didn't say yes. So I said, "Well, okay, I'll come out." And I think the shooting started 2 weeks later. I said, "I'll come out, but I won't sign the contract until I see what the script is." And I just didn't want to get, with a title like that, the title's fine, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't signing up for something that was not what I was told. So I actually flew out to LA. I got there on a Friday night, and it was a Memorial Day weekend. And I got in late on Friday night, got to the director's house about 1 in the morning. And he gave me the script, and I went to bed and read it in bed, and then got up about 7, and we started shooting. And we shot this, he took 7 days to shoot this picture. We shot the 3-day weekend, and then the next 2 weekends, I wasn't there because we shot my stuff out in those 3 days. So over a three weekend period, he shot this picture. And it's a very low budget film, which is Fred is famous for it. Fred shoots very fast. He doesn't reshoot if you make a mistake. He shoots a master shot, and if you make a mistake, that's your close-up. So he has a terrific ratio because he doesn't plan his shots, other than planning the master shot. He doesn't design the way that each scene is going to roll out. He just allows the mistakes to define the close-up shots. So after a while, you learn make a mistake so you can get a close-up. And so I got on the set. It was very low budget. What had happened was he'd been asked to come in and save a picture. And the deal he made with them, because they needed additional scenes shot and then a re-edit of the film. So he agreed to do it so long as he could have the camera equipment when it was being shot on 35. If he could have the equipment and the lighting on the weekends when they weren't shooting. So he rented a studio for 3 weekends, a soundstage, and used. So we shot a picture with virtually no budget on 35 millimeter. So, and he's a very fast, like I say, he's very quick, and the budget was tiny. I mean, it was very funny because I was standing on the set and I was looking around, and there's this sarcophagus, and it looks just like Grace Jones. And I turned to the prop master and I said, "This looks like Grace Jones." And he says, "Well, it is. This is from Vamp." So he was actually renting props from other films. And at one point, the prop guy said to me, he said, "So what do you think of the sets?" And I said, "Well, it looks pretty good." He says, $500. I said, "What do you mean $500? He says, "That's my budget. I had $500 to do the sets for this movie." But it worked with Fred, because Fred does a certain kind of film. It's the kind of film he does. I mean, that he wants to do. I mean, at least he was doing that sort of stuff then. And it was great working with him. I mean, it was a lot of fun on that set. Nobody was upset. Nobody was uptight. Nobody was yelling. You just did your job. The hard part was that I never had time to learn my lines. I didn't even know who the character was. I mean, so usually you'd like to not only have your lines down before you start shooting, but you want to have time to think about who this guy is and how he presents himself, what he's like physically, what he's like mentally. There was none of that. I mean, the first day of shooting, I had read the script, but the first day of shooting, he says, "Okay, in this scene, you stand behind this window and look menacing. Now, stand behind this window and look angry." Well, that's the same expression, because I don't have a clue who this character is. And then we'd shoot a scene where I had dialogue, and he'd say, "Okay, you're going to walk into the room and say this line." And it made for really off-the-cuff filmmaking. I mean, there was a film reviewer who said, "When you see Hanson's acting in Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, you understand why they wouldn't give him a speaking part in Chainsaw Massacre." I mean, how can you deliver a character when you don't even have a clue? So, but it was a lot of fun to make the movie. I was amazed at how much we shot in 3 days.
It's kind of interesting, though, that a film like that, as kind of maybe your comeback to doing film, it's just kind of funny how it's almost like tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. I mean, I think that was the fun part of it, was that it played like a comedy, which was the whole attempt. The whole thing was, like you said, tongue-in-cheek. It was an attempt to just parody the kind of 60s, early 70s British horror films. You know, this is a gentleman, my character is a gentleman of indeterminate Middle Eastern origin who has a little cult of chainsaw-wielding prostitutes in downtown LA. You know, what is this? In fact, Fred was funny because he wanted everything done so directly that on the third day of shooting, I finally was caught up enough that I started trying to get my lines learned, you know, with those spare minutes I had. And Jay Richardson played the detective, and there was a scene on the third day where the detective, my character has captured him, or my minions have captured him, and he's tied up, sitting on a couch, and we're having a conversation. So Jay and I talked about it, and I said, I don't want to just stand there and deliver a line. We've got to be doing something. So I borrowed a nail file from the makeup woman, and then during the scene, the intention was that I never look at him. I just filing my nails. Then at the end of this dialogue between us, I blow the stuff in his face. So we start shooting this little scene, and we're not 15 seconds into it, and Fred says, "Cut!" "What's that?" And I said, "Well, it's a little business we worked up." He said, "Oh, get rid of that shit. Just shoot the scene." So I wasn't allowed even to have any business. I just stood there and recited my lines to Jay, and he sat there on the couch and recited his lines back, because that was what we were allowed to do.
kind of almost Ed Wood-like in
Yeah.
in a sense like that.
Yeah, I think the difference is that Fred has a real sense of humor about himself. You know, Fred loves to make movies. And for Fred, it's the process of making the movie that's the fun part. Where I always thought of Ed Wood as being a person who deeply believed in what he was doing. He was absolutely incompetent, as we all know. But he really wanted to be a great filmmaker. I think that's what I really loved about the Ed Wood movie, was he really captured that sense of Wood's schlockiness and incompetence, but made a movie that was neither schlocky nor incompetent while doing it.
That's a great movie. Are you a fan of horror films? And mostly, like, I guess horror literature would be even more pertaining.
You know, it's funny. I never liked horror movies as a kid. They were always too scary for me. I liked those 50s giant monster movies, The Crawling Eye, you know, that was one of my favorites, you know, the Deadly Mantis. Because I thought of them as sort of more sort of weird sci-fi than horror. And I saw them on Friday night. I was living in Texas at the time, and the local TV station was called the Friday Night Shock Theater. And I really enjoyed those. But otherwise, I never was a fan of horror particularly. Once we did Chainsaw, I think my feelings about horror changed. I started being much more attentive to horror pictures. And then right after I did Hookers, I was asked to write a horror film. And so I had any of my friends who were horror fans, give me the names of their favorite horror movies. So in a period of about 30 days, I think I watched about 40 or 45 horror films. And I also read the Encyclopedia of Horror, which has the plot summary of every horror film ever made, I think. And at the end of that period, I really got so I liked horror movies. And now I really enjoy them. But it took, I think, that immersion in them to start to enjoy them. My favorite horror picture is a movie called The Haunting. It was remade a couple of years ago with Catherine Zeta-Jones, which I saw the trailers for it and didn't want to see it. I thought it's such a mistake. Why do people want to take what was already a brilliantly made film and successful at what it is trying to do and remake it? What are they thinking? Are they thinking they're going to do a better job? Because they're not. If they think they're such brilliant filmmakers, why don't they come up with their own idea?
So is that kind of appropriate to how you feel about the remake they're doing right now of Texas Chainsaw?
I think it's really a mistake. I think that it's just, I mean, I can't judge their motives, but I'm wondering why, if they think they're so good that they're going to outdo the original Chainsaw, that they can't just do it with their own idea. I mean, I've heard this before. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I just hope I'm the director of the new Chainsaw movie, because I've got this great idea and I could do the greatest horror movie ever made. And I want to scream at them. Well, then come up with your own idea. What makes you, an 18-year-old, what gives you the right to hook your tail onto, you know, hook yourself onto our coattails? If you're that good, then do something of your own. And I think that it's just a mistake. You know, when they approached me to work on this new Chainsaw movie, the first thing this casting woman says to me is, now this is going to be a dark psychological horror movie, not a bloodbath like the original. So of course the first thing I say to her is, have you ever seen Chainsaw Massacre? Oh yes. And I'm thinking, no you haven't. Or if you did, you closed your eyes and you've never paid attention to that movie. Why would I think that these people could make a movie that out-chainsaws Chainsaw? Because I can see, at least the people I talked to, didn't know what Chainsaw was about. So I have real doubts about this. I mean, why do you want to remake shot for shot Psycho? Why can't you just come up with your own idea? So I really object to, and of course this is all the phenomenon of, I mean, I think doing remakes of movies, it's just an extension of the sequel business. There are certain films that cry out for sequels, like The Thin Man, Nick and Nora Jones. Because really there, what you're interested in is a couple of really interesting characters and their dog. they're the heart of the film. It's a character film. So you say, let's make some movies that have these very interesting characters as the heart of them. But when you're doing plot-driven films, which films are now, especially ones that you do sequels for, plot and effects-driven, why do you think you're going to recapture those elements in another film? I just don't think it happens. And I think, experience bears me out. I mean, what film, other than The Godfather 2, which is character-driven, other than that, what sequel has ever outdone or come close to the original?
Now, with the 2 sequels, well, I think of them as 2. There's like
3.
3. I know you were approached to work on them. I'm not sure to what extent. And did you really consider it, or did you not want to be part?
I did, and the problem was always money. The first picture, which was A New Line, this was Chainsaw 2 that Toby directed, they approached me to play Leatherface. But their attitude was, it's a guy in a mask. So they offered me union scale. And I said, look, you got to pay me more than union scale. And I said, make me an offer that reflects what you think I'm worth to you. But in fact, their offer, when they came back with a counteroffer, it was lower than the original. Because originally it was scale plus 10%. And I said, what's the 10%? And they said, well, it's your agent's fee. I said, I don't have an agent. So they simply dropped that. I mean, they were absolutely uninterested in paying me anything more than the minimum, what they had to pay a guy off the street. So that didn't work out, because as far as they were concerned, there was no reason to hire the original actor back. Because I don't think they understand fans, first of all, that fans know the difference. With Chainsaw 3, Jeff Bird's a friend of mine who directed it, and he wanted me in the picture, and we actually started talking early on. And he sent me the script, and so we spent a lot of time on the phone discussing the script and the things that were wrong with it. I mean, I felt there were like big mistakes in the script. It's mistakes in the sense of inconsistencies with the way the character had been created originally. I wasn't going to criticize, or it was not for me to talk about any of the other elements, but just looking at Leatherface as a character and how he was in the original script, I thought that consistency was important. So we worked on that because I was very interested in being in the film. But I also told Jeff, I said, I want to do this picture, but I'm not doing it for union scale. You got to pay me more than that. And Jeff, he was very straightforward with me. He said, I don't think it's going to happen. And he called me back a couple of days later and said, look, it's not going to happen. We'd love to have you in the picture, but the producers have told me I can't offer you more than scale. Which was fine, because it was very straightforward. It just doesn't going to happen. With the fourth Chainsaw, which was written and directed by Kim Henkel, it was an insult. He offered me $600 a week to play Leatherface. And I laughed. I said, $600 a week, that's a fraction of my day rate. And I said, I absolutely refuse to do this. And I know they offered the original sound recordist $1,500 a week. And I said, and an apology that it was so little, and I said to him, Wayne, I know you're worth a lot more than $1,500 a week, so I understand their apology. But why are they offering you 2.5 times what they offered me? I mean, are you worth that much more to the film than I am? So in fact, in that case, I always dealt with the production woman. I didn't talk to Kim during this negotiation. And she said, I told her what I wanted out of the film. And so then she called me back a few days later and said, well, no, the offer stands at $600. I said, well, I'm not going to be in your movie. And she says, all right, do you have a message for Kim? Which was, what a great open door. I said, yeah, tell Kim to go fuck himself. And she was very upset when I said that. She said, oh, we don't use that kind of language. And I said, well, I guess you've never worked in L.A. So the funny part of all of this is I mean, it's always come down to the money. And I've never been grubbing for money. All I ever wanted these people to do was to admit or acknowledge that having me in the film was worth something to them. Because if it's not worth anything to them, if they're going to pay me what they got to pay some guy off the street, then let them have some guy off the street. And the funny part to me is, in each case, when I've seen the movie, I've been relieved that I wasn't associated with it. Everyone, I think, had some serious problems as both as horror films, but also as sequels to Chainsaw. Chainsaw 2, to me, it lacked imagination. So much of Chainsaw 2 was a rehashing of former scenes. What's Dennis Hopper's character doing in that movie? Why are you seeing it? Oh, because it's Dennis Hopper. Chainsaw 3, the producers come along because they don't like the finished product for whatever reason, and without telling the director, they shoot an additional 10 minutes and stick it on the end of the movie. So the movie has two endings. The movie ends and then it starts up again, and a guy you just saw die comes back and saves the heroine. Plus, you know, they've got this idiotic understanding or idiotic manifestation of Leatherface. Chainsaw 4, well, to me it's like just a bad rewrite of Chainsaw 1. So in every case I was glad that I could say, yes, I was the original Leatherface, but no, I had nothing to do with those other films. I'm really long-winded.
That's fine with me. I was going to ask how Leatherface changed your life. I think we've kind of discussed this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing that changed my life about Leatherface was it was something I did because I thought it'd be interesting as a summer job. And the way it's changed my life is it's gotten me involved with movies, not just because I work as an actor occasionally, but, you know, I've been doing some screenwriting, and it's allowed me to move into that to some degree. It also facilitates a bad habit. You know, there's an old joke that says, how do you make a small fortune as a writer? You start with a big fortune. Well, working in films and doing appearances, one of the things it does is it underwrites pet projects. I can work on a novel that I know I can't sell until it's done. So doing these things and being involved with film allows me periodically, 2 or 3 months, where I don't have to worry about paying the bills. I've got that money saved, and I can go do these projects that are projects I do because I like them, or it's because it's something I really want to do, not because they're paying the bills. So that's really the big change in my life. And the other big change is that it's turned me into a real talker. I mean, I've always been very shy and very uncomfortable getting up in front of people. But you know, when I go to these conventions, fan conventions, they ask me to get up and give talks. You just overcome that. And when you have to get up in front of a camera and do stuff that I might otherwise feel very self-conscious doing, and I have to just put that aside, it changes the way I am in the world.
And what about the conventions and the fans? How do you feel about that?
I really enjoy going to the conventions and meeting fans. I try not to go very often because I think you can start to believe the bullshit. I think there's a danger in making your life basically celebrating something you did a long time ago or something you did recently, because after a while you start believing that you're really important. You know, that I notice in myself that when I come home, I suddenly catch myself talking like my friends are really interested in hearing every word I have to say, and they're not. But you know, it's a side effect of that. But I like the conventions, as long as I don't overdo it. I mean, I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting people. My work, you know, the time I spend writing and working on my own, mostly is solitary. So to be able to 3 or 4 times a year be in a very intense social environment for 2 days or 3 days is a great balance to what I do. I really like meeting fans. They're really interesting people. You know, a lot of people say to me, well, isn't it weird? I mean, aren't horror movie fans just really weird? And my reaction is, you know, the horror fans I meet are grateful that I'll talk to them. They're delighted to meet me. They are excited and having a great time over the weekend. I can't imagine a horror movie fan killing the person that they think is their hero. It happens with fans of straight, sort of mainstream actors. I can't imagine it would ever happen, because someone who's looking at the horror fan world from the outside may say, no, there's something strange about these people. But in truth, there's nothing strange about these people. And they seem to me to be very, very much, just at heart, this is something they really love. And so they just manifest that. And I mean, virtually every fan I meet of Chainsaw, I think is a really interesting, nice person. I mean, yeah, everybody meets people they don't want to hang around with, but it's a very different community of people than I think non-horror fans imagine it to be.
It's good to hear. What was an average day on the set like when you were working on Chainsaw?
Working on Chainsaw was really difficult. I think the most commonly asked question is, was it fun working on this movie? And I think people expect me to say, oh, it was great. And they're usually surprised and often disappointed when I say, it was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. We shot, now the shooting I think was a total of 6 weeks, and my shooting was 4 weeks. So during those 4 weeks, we shot 7 days a week. We shot 12 to 16 hours a day. Generally, we'd get a 12-hour break, which is time enough to drive home, get cleaned up, eat a quick meal, and go to bed. And then you get up and you get back on the set. So it was a totally total immersion experience. In addition, it was, 95, 100, 105 degrees every day, 98% humidity. This is Texas in August and early September. So we were extremely uncomfortable physically. We had a trailer, we had actually an RV, air-conditioned RV, for about 3 days. Then after that, we had nothing. So we sat outside and waited. I spent a lot of time with my butt planted on the steps of that old farmhouse. We had to run. I was running a lot of that movie. So it was very demanding physically. The conditions were very difficult. And I think all of us were exhausted, and it shows in the movie. And I think that's part of why this movie works. On the other side, these were great people to work with. I really liked the actors. Now, I spent almost no time with the victims, because we had this whole thing going about, well, they don't want to really be around you because they want to be genuinely frightened, which that's really a bunch of hooey. Because the one time one of the actors was genuinely frightened in a scene, he ruined the scene because he was so frightened he ran away. So that was I thought it was pretty foolish thinking. But I spent most of my time because of that with the killers, the other family members. And they were a great bunch of guys. And we really had a good time in that sense of, I liked them, I liked being around them. We could talk and sort of catch up on things and learn about each other while we were waiting to shoot scenes. It also was an environment that I'd never been in. I came right out of graduate school. And I had never been in an environment where everybody was really good at what they did. And everybody was giving their best effort. As much as we'd like to think of that's a description of the personality of every college student, it's not the case. When I was in college, and even in graduate school, there were a lot of people there who weren't real good at being graduate students. And there were a lot of us who weren't doing our best, however good we were. So that's what was great about working on Chainsaw. I came away from that thinking, that's what I want to do. Whatever I do in life, I just want to be good at it, And I want to give my best effort. So that was the great thing about working on Chainsaw. And it's interesting because, it's 30 years now since we filmed Chainsaw. I'm still in touch with every actor on that film. John Dugan, who played Grandpa, is the only one I hardly talk to. I've talked to him maybe 4 or 5 times in these last 30 years. But that's just, he never lived close. I talked to Marilyn very regularly. He was Sally. Jim Sedow, who played the cook, he lives in Houston. And Ed Neal lives in Austin. Paul Partain, who was Franklin, lives in Austin. And so what happens is when I go to Austin, Paul and I always get together for dinner at his house out on the lake, and we sit out in the backyard, smoke cigars, and drink some whiskey. And I see him and I see Ed every time I'm in Texas. I try, if I'm there more than 3 or 4 days, to get to Houston and see Marilyn and Jim. So, I see them. When Chainsaw was over, Alan Danziger, who plays the guy who's driving the van, I rented a room from him for a month before I moved away from Texas. I talked to him 2 weeks ago. When I'm in Austin, because that's where he lives, we always go for a walk. It's like a daily exercise. So I really have kept up with these people, and I shouldn't say it that way. We've all kept up with each other. And I don't think that's something you expect, but I think we all got something out of making that movie, that has always kept us in some way connected.
You mentioned the heat and how trying that was for most situations. I've heard some stories about just the dinner sequence.
You know, it's funny, when I left Chainsaw, when we finished with Chainsaw, one of the things I kept thinking is, oh man, I smelled really bad. And then as the years went by, I started thinking, maybe I was just self-conscious. Maybe, it wasn't so bad. But then there was a documentary done called Texas Chainsaw Massacre: A Family Portrait. And everyone that Brad Chaladay, the filmmaker, talked to, commented on how bad I smelled. And the reason was, we had one costume for me, and they would not take it to the laundry because they were afraid that the laundry would lose it. And they said even if the laundry didn't lose it, chances were that the color would change. So they didn't dare clean it. So I wore the same clothes 12 to 16 hours a day for 4 straight weeks in really bad heat. So after a while, they could just stack my clothes in a corner and they'd stand up on their own. And because of that, I mean, I always felt miserably uncomfortable as soon as I got the costume on because of that. And when you add that to the dinner scene was part of a 26-hour day. We were trying to get finished, and what had happened was John Dugan, who played Grandpa, it took, I think, 6 hours to put his face on it. So he said, look, you're going to have to shoot me out. I'm not going through this again. So we had to shoot all his stuff in one day. And so we had this extremely long day. And part of that long day was the dinner scene, which is Grandpa's big scene. And we shot that right into the day. And as a result, we had to cover all the windows because it was supposed to be night. So we had black cloth on all the windows, closing it off, plus drapes, plus thousands of Ks of light in that room, and all the actors and crew. So if it was 95 degrees outside, I'm sure it was 115 inside. And it was so hot in there that we had food, like we had head cheese. About every hour or two, we had to take that head cheese and replace it because it was starting to smell bad. You take it out of the refrigerator and it'd go bad in an hour. We had a dead chicken, it was a stuffed chicken, it was a prop, but it had been alive once. And of course it started to go bad, and there was no replacing it because it was our only chicken. So as a result, aside from any individual odors, the set just reeked. And in spite of the rumors, there were no human bones on the set. They were plastic, but there were a lot of animal bones that were used to build that furniture. So that room had a number of animal bones in there as part of the furniture that, of course, started giving off vapor. So it was really miserable. That was the worst part of the shooting. And I know we took a break at one point about 3 in the morning for lunch. And I never got to take the mask off because they had this rule that if you can't take the mask off unless it's a 15-minute break or longer because they were afraid the mask was getting fragile and it was laced up. Every break is a 5-minute break, even if it lasts a half an hour. So we'd go take a break to get air, and I couldn't take the mask off. We'd go outside for 5 minutes, and I'm still breathing through this mask. But the big time, we finally had a lunch break, so I got to take the mask off. I was so relieved I was going to get to be outside and get some air. Got in line for lunch, and the crew member in front of me turned around and said, "You stink. I don't want to have dinner with you." So I actually didn't eat. I just went off because I was so, miserable, and I knew these guys, they didn't want to be around me. So I actually found the doctor who was on the set and said, "Give me some pills. I need some nausea pills." And I went and just, laid down, took the pills, and just lay down for half an hour to try to, sort of get my stomach stabilized. That was the dinner scene in a nutshell.
The masks. How difficult was it working with the mask?
The masks. The problem with the masks was that I couldn't see out of them very well. It didn't matter with the grandma mask, the old lady mask, which is what I'm wearing when they first come home, or even during the wearing what we call the pretty woman mask, which was the dinner scene mask, because I didn't do anything really. I didn't have to move around a lot, but for most of the movie, I wore what we call the killing mask, and the eye holes were very small in that mask. And of course, the mask, even though it was up against my face, the eye part wasn't up against my eyes, it was out a bit. So as a result, I had these very narrow fields of vision. I mean, I could just see what was directly in front of me. 45 degrees, I didn't have a chance. 30 degrees, maybe, probably not. So I had very limited vision, and it made it very difficult, particularly during the chase scenes. There was this, during part of the chase, I fell, we were shooting it at night, I fell with the saw, and it was a live saw. And I fell and landed on my back, and I pitched the saw up in the air, and I'm looking for it, and I can barely see out of the mask. So if the chainsaw isn't directly in front of me, I can't see it. And it went up past the lights. So I just had to roll over. I just rolled over and covered up my head, and it landed beside me, so I was okay. But, you know, there was a great risk there that I was going to get hurt. And if I'd been able to see, I would have been able to get out of the way. At another point, earlier in the picture, where Leatherface captures Terry McMinn, who's the one that goes on the hook, you know, Leatherface grabs her on the front porch and then runs down the hallway and takes her into the kitchen. Well, he has to go through that little room with the sliding metal door, and there's a false floor there and a ramp. So the ramp comes up through the doorway, which means the clearance in the door was probably only about 6 feet. Or maybe it was 6'2". Well, I'm 6'4", and I'm wearing 3-inch heels. So, you know, in the movie, I'm 6'7". And when we did the rehearsal for that scene, we walked through it. So, you know, I was kind of bent over because I was just carrying her. Well, when we actually did the real take, you know, then the energy comes up, and so she's kicking and screaming, and I'm standing pulled back, fully upright to hold on to her, and I ran down the hall, and I didn't clear the door. Now, I would have seen that if I could see out of the mask, but I just couldn't see. So I hit that door frame square in the forehead and knocked me out. So I open my eyes, and Toby is peering into the mask to see if I'm dead. You know, and he says, "Oh, let's take a break." And I'm saying, "No, I'm okay. You know, I'm okay. But, you know, that was the kind of problems we ended up with the mask. That, and of course, it's stuck. I mean, it was latex. You know, it didn't breathe, so I was always soaking wet under the mask because there was no way to get any air underneath that thing. I mean, the mouth hole was fine. I could breathe fine. There was no problem with that.
And you said that you did lose control of the chainsaw one time. I know that there's at least one time where you did hurt yourself with the chainsaw, like burnt yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that was really minor. But yes, there was a time. The last thing we were doing in the movie was where Leatherface falls and gets hit in the leg with the saw. And I kept saying, you know, how are we going to do that? And Toby would say, well, I don't know. But don't worry, it's the last thing we're going to do. And I'd say, oh, that's good. And then I think, well, wait a minute. What he means is, if you get hurt, we've got the movie in the can. So finally they decided what they were going to do was wrap a piece of sheet metal around my leg and then tape down a stake and then a blood bag over that. And the idea was then the saw hits the pants, goes right through, and you'll see the meat. Well, we did that shot, and the saw went through the blood bag and the beef, the steak, so fast that within half a second it hit the sheet metal and immediately heated the sheet metal up so that it burned my leg. And I just got this stab of pain, and I thought the thing had gone right through the sheet metal. So in that shot, when you see, I'm actually controlling the saw, and you'll see Leatherface yank that saw out of the way and grab his leg. The reason I'm doing that is, I mean, I was supposed to do something like that, but I thought I just cut my leg open with the chainsaw. So I grabbed it and slapped down like that, and this blood comes spurting out. And that was because there was a lot of residue blood in the bag, and it was just squeezing the bag and squeezed the blood out. It looked great. But for that split second, I thought that was my own blood. And then I realized it wasn't because it didn't hurt. It was just that instant of that burn until it pulled the saw away. And it was no big burn. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, an injury more than, you know, when I finally got all that stuff off, there was a little reddish spot, you know, where I got in a little first degree. I mean, it was absolutely no kind of injury. Just that for that instant I thought that I'd been hurt with the saw.
Okay. How do other people feel when they find out that you were Leatherface? Do people get intimidated?
It depends. What do people feel like when they know I was Leatherface? I think there are people who say, no, it's not true. How do I know you were Leatherface? And I have to say, well, why would I lie to you? Whatever. Or I'd say, I don't really care whether you believe me or not. if I meet people at a show and and I'm introduced to them and they're told I'm Leatherface, they're really excited. When I meet people just socially, most of them, they all know who Leatherface is. I think the only time that it has been the case where the person at least pretended not to know was I was introduced once to Frank Langella. And this friend of mine, I mean, what was she thinking? She introduces me, and the first thing she says is I was Leatherface. And Langella says, who? And she says, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he says, never heard of it. And I'm sure there was this twinkle in his eye. And I was so grateful that if he did know that he said that. I have to say, I think it's the worst way to be introduced. Because what it does is it makes the person being introduced think that that's the most interesting thing about me. And that's the one thing you ought to know. Where it's not the one thing you ought to know. It's the last thing you ought to know, unless you're at a horror fan convention. When I do meet people who are not horror movie buffs, they're surprised and kind of intrigued by it. They're not put off by it. I think I meet occasionally a person who will say, oh, how disgusting, how could you kill all those people, and how dare you work with such violent movies, and don't you know you're responsible? I mean, I get that once in a while. But mostly people are just sort of bemused by it, to think that I was in this movie. He couldn't have been you, you know. You're not dangerous. But the horror fans are really always pleased when they discover that I was the one.
Well, thank you for your time.
Sure, you're welcome. I hope that.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Gunnar. I mean, I know I had the time of my life having the chance to talk to him and getting it on film, so I hope you liked it too. And, you know, come back next time. It won't be as long a break as there was after episode 3, I swear. But come back next time, and I'll have another great interview for you. This has been Indie Cult Horror. See you next time.